welcome to April.
I know.
So, let's see. We've talked about the right stuff. We talked about hidden figures. So we're going to continue our progression today and talk about the HBO mini-series From the Earth to the Moon, which is kind of different because we're not actually doing a single movie. This was a 12-part episode or 12-part mini-series that aired on HBO. And I'm sure at this point, everybody recognizes Shelby here as my guest. So we have this one, and then we have one more episode, which is a movie this time, I promise.
It is.
And it will be coming out a couple days earlier, and hopefully you'll see it and understand the significance of the date that I'm releasing that next episode. So with no further ado, let's actually watch a little trailer to this story.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
Can we do it?
We have to.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
It is the biggest rocket anyone has ever seen.
For the first time in the history of our civilization, a man is going to set foot on the moon.
So a little caveat about what it was showing there at the very end about watching this in a whole new way. This miniseries originally came out in 1998, and the CGI on it, I thought for the times especially, really held up well and looked good. But for the, I guess it is the 20th anniversary already.
You're making me feel old, man.
I know. I had to stop and mentally think about that for half a second. Yeah, it was for the 20th anniversary. They pulled the archive footage out of the vault, digitized it, and a new CGI house came in and updated most of the CGI on it. Not everything. And so to me, and this is almost a precursor to what everyone will see on the channel next month, this is it almost feels like watching the 97 re-release of Star Wars.
Okay, yeah.
With Lucas's, I've added new CGI. Some of it's good.
Yeah.
Some of it's like, why did you have to change that scene?
Exactly.
So, yeah. I don't know. I still love the overall way they did the stories. And we're actually going to just, I have the description of each episode here. So we'll just go episode by episode, talk about our favorite things about each one.
Sounds good.
And just out of curiosity, what is your favorite episode, if any?
I have to look at the names of them again. I would say, honestly, my favorite is I want to say it's probably episode 8. Up this program.
That's funny because that is probably my least favorite episode.
Really?
Yeah. For myself, I don't know why. Maybe it's because Alan Ruck has a spot in it, but I really love episode 5, Spider.
Yeah.
So, But we'll get to why we like each and every one of them as we go. So, as you can imagine, we kind of start with the JFK speech. Well, actually, we start off with a quick, what almost feels the entire flight of Sam Shepard's flight.
Yeah, Alan Shepard.
Alan Shepard. Why did I? You know why? Because I'm still thinking about the right stuff. Okay, so Alan Shepard, not Sam Shepard, who played Chuck Yeager in the right stuff. So episode 1, can we do it or do this? NASA responds to JFK's challenge of landing a man on the moon with a group of new astronauts for the Gemini program, who work towards the eventual lunar voyage with a series of risky and groundbreaking Earth missions. So I do love a couple scenes that stick out in my mind is almost that scene we see there in the trailer of the NASA administrators listening to the speech. Can we do this?
Yeah.
And, you know, just the way they respond to it, it's like, wow. You could just see the way they were reacting to the moment.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of pressure and what is this going to take?
Yeah.
So
I think the one thing I like so much about the episode is that it does set the whole story up. But the other thing I really appreciate about it is the fact they did such a great job of getting individuals that look like real people.
that's
like the
true.
Webb looks almost exactly like the real James Webb, who is the original NASA. You know, these people, they did a great job with that.
They absolutely did. The other really fun thing about this, seeing how many of these actors from the series have really gone on to bigger and better things.
Absolutely. And how many of the ones from the series are actually going to show up in our next episode?
Well, yeah, we should point that out. So this miniseries did come out after the success of Apollo 13. And Tom Hanks pitched the idea to Ron Howard and Brian Grazer to help produce From the Earth to the Moon.
Yeah.
And each one of these episodes is introduced by Tom Hanks.
Yes.
In front of a fractured mosaic of the Apollo statue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so funny to go back and watch that now because he looks so young.
Yeah. It's almost like seeing him in Big.
Yes.
Even though this was almost 10 years later. So the actor that played James Webb was Dan Lauria. I may have mispronounced the last name. And John Carroll Lynch played Bob Gurlith. And John, you'll probably recognize as Drew Carey's brother from the Drew Carey Show, if you were a fan. And you got Ted Levine playing Alan Shepard, and yeah. Compared to the Alan Shepard that we see in the Disney Plus version of The Right Stuff, yeah, I really do prefer him in this one. One other thing I want to point out for connectivity throughout all the series, we have the late Lane Smith, I should say at this point, as Emmerich Seaborn.
Oh, yeah.
He's the only fictional character in the entire saga.
Yeah.
If you really want to, he's basically Walter Cronkite and all the other news science editors of the
Mashed
day mashed into one. So that's as I said, he's the only fictitious character we really have throughout this whole thing. Virtually everybody else was a real person, and it's all based on a book.
Yep.
And I know we both have the book, so go ahead and tell the audience.
Man on the Moon by Andrew Chaikin.
And I would show you my copy, but I need to retape it again.
Did you break it again?
You'll find that most people who read this book reread the book and reread the book to the point that they have to go rebuy the book.
Although I actually was lucky enough to meet Andrew Chaikin at Space Fest. And, of course, they had brand new copies and people were buying brand new copies. I looked down at my copy, which of course is well loved and, beaten up. The spine's all, you can see exactly where I've opened it up and, flipped it down, page down on a desk. And he looked at my book and he kind of, picked it up and kind of looked at it and goes, this is an author's greatest compliment to see their book loved this well.
All right. So on top of that, it's the only time we really see Deke Slayton in this episode acting like an astronaut, even though
he was
And the person we have playing Deke this time is Nick Searcy.
Yep.
So, and then this is also the episode where we get introduced to the new Nine.
Yes.
And I would have to say this sequence is my favorite part of this episode.
It's hilarious.
Was this in DC or was this in Houston?
Houston.
So each time we get introduced to one of the new Nine, they're walking up to this hotel counter and tells the manager, I believe you have a room reserved for me. The name is Peck, Max Peck.
Yep.
And each time the manager says, yes, Mr. Peck, we've been expecting you, and hands him a key.
Yep.
And this happens and happens. And then all of a sudden, here comes Jim Lovell, played by, do you remember?
I don't.
So for our younger audience, I will say he's the voice of Superman. And even then, we're talking middle schoolers or older at this point.
Okay.
I think Jerry O'Connell now plays Superman's voice in the current animation. But he did the Superman voice in the early 2000s. For the older audience, I will say if you're a fan of Wings, you'll recognize him. Or most recently, you'll probably recognize him from Madam Secretary.
Okay.
But it's Tim Daly.
Okay.
And I just love how the manager wasn't at the desk. And we just have this sweet little blonde gal. You're who?
Yeah.
She's looking at the reservations.
Got this.
And he jumps in. I got this. I believe they're expecting you up in the mezzanine.
Yeah.
And he walks in, and if you're drinking with Pete Conrad, you're drinking with bad company or something.
Yeah. Or better make sure he's buying or something like that.
And then Conrad goes, oh, great. Who let Shaky in?
Yep.
Now, I will point out that we actually have two different Pete Conrads in this mini-series.
Yeah.
We have Pete for this episode, and we have a completely different Pete for the episode. I want to say it's 6. Let me pull it up. Be sure.
It's all there is.
Yeah, I was looking for the number, though. And of course, as soon as my phone goes to sleep, it logs out of that app. So episode 7, that's all there is.
Yep.
Which is probably my second favorite episode in the whole saga.
And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I would say that one is my favorite, followed by number 8.
So, okay, we'll get to it. I'm holding. So, in fun, it's just a great start to the Gemini program. They don't go into a lot of the missions or anything like that in Gemini. Is this the one where they end? Yeah, they do end with the final Gemini mission.
Yes, they do.
So we do get a couple of introductions throughout this. So we do see.
And they do talk about Gemini 9.
That's the one with Armstrong, right? Yeah. So we do see Armstrong quite literally saving the space program with his quick decisions. And he's with Dave Scott, as I recall.
Yep.
So, final Gemini mission is Jim Lovell and Buzz Aldrin. And I just a little communication that you hear, hey, Buzz, check the oil while you're out there.
Yep. It was the first fully successful spacewalk where he was able to accomplish everything he needed to because he was able to train in the neutral buoyancy tank before going up.
So we move on to probably the saddest episode, simply called Apollo 1.
Yep.
The tragic death of Apollo's first 3 astronauts during the pre-launch test haunts the spacecraft designers as they struggle to come to terms with what happened and find a way to save the moon program. So this is a very important episode, but it is sad and
it's tough.
It's a tough one to watch. It really is. They don't sugarcoat anything. They do skip about the last 5 seconds of the audio transmission.
Thank goodness.
But as sad as it is, I do find a couple things interesting about this. And one is being Frank Borman was asked to lead the investigation.
Yes.
Of this dismantling of, I believe, spacecraft 5.
Yeah.
The command module.
Yep.
Because the first 2 were actually part of the No Man flight tests.
Yeah, they're boilerplates.
And then 3 was the one that burnt up, right? So we find out that Gus has a pretty good sense of humor.
That he does.
I've searched, and I think I did once find the actual photograph that the astronauts took.
Yep.
And it's sweet.
It is. It's very sweet.
And just, how would you describe it?
I think the part that I love about this episode, outside of the fact of the accident, I mean, they did a fantastic job. I love where they showed issue with the Velcro.
Yeah, the Velcro was incredible to see.
Yeah, but also too what Frank said about the astronauts themselves. When he was like, you know the astronauts.
Okay, you're jumping to almost the end of the episode with that one, but no, I do like how Frank pulled out basically a transcript of a previous interview that Gus had done, talking about the dangers of space exploration.
Yes.
So that was really sweet. But we also kind of meet the engineer who's involved in the testing of the hatch.
Yep.
Which in the right stuff, we talked about it a little bit, that the way they did it in the 82 movie, it paints the picture that Gus, as they said in the movie, screwed the pooch. But everybody, all the astronauts came to his aid. In fact, as I recall, you said at the end of that episode, it was Gordo who, on purpose, hit that.
Yep.
Just to prove what kind of bruise you would get if you actually hit it on accident or on purpose.
Exactly. It was going to take more. It's not just a light brushing of the button. No, you had to smack it pretty hard.
So we should point out that we do see Brett Collins here as Dave Scott, who we also see in Apollo 13.
Yep. He is Jack Lousman in Apollo 13.
So we have Ben Marley as Roger Chaffee and Chris Isaac as Ed White.
That's right.
And I thought in the first episode, we didn't really talk about it, but he does the first spacewalk.
Yep, he does.
And really, Chris Isaac has 3 episodes being played out across the 12.
Right.
He has his spacewalk, we have his death, and then what we don't see in that first episode, but we do see later on the episode called The First Wives Club, the ground transmission between his wife and him.
Yes.
During that mission. So Mark Ralston is who actually plays Gus Grissom. And if you're a fan of audiobooks, he does a lot of narration on audiobooks.
Does he really?
And one movie I'm sure we're going to eventually get to, because it's one of my absolute favorites, and I know it's one I've been talking to Luke about possibly doing, is the Shawshank Redemption.
I was going to say, the first time I watched that episode, I saw him pop up. I'm like, what's Boggs doing in here? Such a great show.
Now, here is the only actor that had a part in The Right Stuff who's also in the miniseries. And that's David Clennon. He plays Dr. Lee Silvers in our later episodes.
Okay.
But if you go back and look at The Right Stuff, he's that civilian contractor that was always around with Chuck.
I can't even remember that they're the same person.
It is.
Watch again.
Dan Butler, who you may recognize from Frasier.
Okay.
He played Mad Dog. He plays Gene Kratz.
Okay.
So, all right. So, shall we move on to the next episode?
Sure.
All right. So, in episode 3, sorry, it shut down again. Episode 3, the Mark Harmon episode. We have cleared the tower. A documentary film crew follows the final preparations for the first manned Apollo launch. Now behind schedule due to the Apollo 1 fire, astronauts and launch pad personnel bet their lives and America's space future on its success. And this was, each one of these episodes has a different feeling to it.
They do.
With this one, you see hints that Wally is has a good sense of humor.
Oh, yeah, that too.
Because we do see the urine sample gag on screen.
Yes, we do.
And we do finally see Dee O'Hara in any of these, actually.
Yes.
So that's kind of fun, especially since you actually got to meet her.
Yeah, she's a very, very sweet lady. While I understand, privacy rules and whatnot, I really wish that woman would write a book.
So this is the only launch of the Saturn IIB rocket.
Yes. Yes.
Everybody else is using the Saturn V, and they're using the Type 2 couches, or the Type 1 couch.
Type 1 couches in the Type 2 capsule, yes.
Because the Type 2 couches weren't quite ready yet.
Yeah, which kind of seems to be the story of Apollo 7.
Yeah. Excuse me. Now, I have seen some footage of the astronauts later in life where they wish they would have taken more time to really consider the video footage that it took up in the capsule.
Yeah.
And we see in this episode, Wally's like, no, that's a distraction. We're testing out a new ship here, and I got 2 rookies with me.
Yep.
I want to keep this simple. And we see it in the prep meeting.
Yes.
That Deke says, we'll take it under advisement. And they eventually did do some footage up there, but they didn't capture as much as they potentially could have.
Yeah, and part of that was because of the fact, of course, all 3 of them, well, primarily Wally was sick. And the story, from what I understand, is that they had been out. Of course, this was before the time when they, had to be locked basically into the crew quarters for a couple days prior to launch, and they were out spending time outside in the days prior to launch, and there was a difference in weather and started developing a head cold. And Dee O'Hara actually said, well, here, if you take this, you're not going to get sick. And Wally was the one that chose not to take it.
That just blows my mind. Now, I think my favorite funny moment in this, even beside the urine gag, is when the documentary filmmaker interviews the meteorologist.
Yeah.
And he's like, we got the class 2 Doppler, and he just lists off everything. And really, the most accurate thing I have for the local weather is this window right here.
Yep.
And he just says it's so deadpan. It's like,
oh, yeah.
It's perfect. So the documentary filmmaker in this. What's that?
I love how they portrayed Gunther Wendt.
Oh, God.
They did such bad with that.
And this is the first, technically speaking, this is the first time, even though we hear it first on film in Apollo 13.
Yeah.
I wonder what Gunther Wendt.
Yep. And the fact they called it the Padfuhrer. I mean,
it's a little hard to think about in current days context.
Yeah.
But at that time,
it was hilarious.
Oh, you have to think about it in the time frame where it was. While it was, it was racist. Let's face it.
Yeah.
But it was not meant to be derogatory.
Correct. It has to go back to the fact that Gunther Wendt was part of the team that was brought over to the United States during Operation Paperclip at the end of World War II.
And I know there is a great, I think it was on Netflix, that has a docudrama about that.
Oh, I'll have to go find it.
I think it's either Prime or Netflix that I saw it, and it's just you see Van Braun try and gather his team, secretly to basically surrender to the U.S. Army.
Yep, because he didn't want to go to Russia.
Yep. So overall, obviously, it was a success, and due to things that happened on that episode, we also see that Wally never flies again.
No, and neither does Dawn. And that was when I got to meet Walt Cunningham at Space Fest. He, I told him, I said, I appreciate the fact you guys flew the longest and most successful test flight of any spacecraft you've ever had. And then you got shafted afterwards.
What was his response?
Not many people know that or see it that way.
Now, I have to admit, I had to go back and rewatch this episode, episode 4. I probably had to watch it 2 or 3 times since the election.
Yeah.
Because the chaos that we were experiencing in the country leading up to this last election, the parallels to what was happening in 68.
Exactly.
So the episode is simply titled 1968. NASA takes its boldest and most controversial step as an attempt to fly men around the moon and back for the first time in history at the end of the most... See, I think they got to rephrase this because one of the most turmoil years of the century.
Yeah.
2020, I don't know. It's giving 68 a run for its money at this point.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So in this episode, we have Frank Borman, we have Jim Lovell, and
Bill Anders
doing the first flight around the moon, which is I believe this is also the episode that... No. So in 5, we see the other version of what happened here. What I mean is Deke brings the idea to... who was it in Apollo 9? My mind is just a blank right now.
Brought it up to Jim McDivitt first.
Yeah, he ran into McDivitt. And basically what they did is they swapped missions.
Yeah.
Apollo 8 was originally supposed to be the first testing of the LEM. Lunar Module. It's not called the LEM anymore, as we learn in the next episode. But basically, if you read the book Rocket Man, you kind of find out how it happened. They decided one giant Hail Mary, skip over a bunch of pre-planned missions, and just send the command module, no LEM, so no secondary safety systems, really.
Exactly.
And launch them around the moon Christmas Day, 1968. And the way they do this episode, it's a great flashback to not just what all was happening in 68, including the Bobby Kennedy assassination.
JFK, or not JFK, but
Martin Luther King.
Vietnam.
And just that boyish optimism in Jim's face.
Yeah.
The first time we see the iconic Earthrise actually on film.
Yeah.
And hands down, I loved it in the original before they did the updated CGI effects. But what they did in this one, they played with some of the lighting a little better. And just the way the reflection comes in through that triangular window over Borman's face. It's just amazing to if you do get this on digital, you'll see the digital team talking about the restoration, and they actually do a side-by-side of the original to the same scene I'm talking about with the updated effects.
I'll have to go see if I can find that.
So it is fantastic. And what I really enjoy is seeing them recreate the Genesis moment.
Yes.
And if you're not familiar with that, as they were doing a live transmission back to Earth, being broadcast over the airwaves
on Christmas Eve,
Christmas Eve, they read from the book of Genesis. And after their successful flight, NASA was getting telegrams, because telegrams were still a thing back then.
Yeah.
Obviously they got a note from the president.
Sure.
And I don't remember the gal's name. Do you?
No.
Okay. But you know the note I'm referring to. So even, I think it was Jay Dowling's character, who was actually at Capcom at that point, and he's reading it up saying, this name probably doesn't mean anything to you, but somebody in public affairs liked it and sent it up. And it just simply says, thank you. You saved 1968.
Yep.
And then, as we'll see in the next episode, Time Life introduced the 3 astronauts as the persons of the year.
Yep.
So,
and also got sued after that.
Yes, they got sued by an atheist for reading the Bible over the airwaves.
Yeah, and then also too, there was apparently one of the an overseas newscaster that was like, what is it that they just read? And of course he's like, aren't you in a hotel room? And the guy's like, well, yeah. He goes, go look in the nightstand. He goes, it's the first page. Talking about the first page of the Bible. It said every hotel room's nightstand. So that
you're referring to the Gideon Bible.
Yeah.
That's in almost every hotel's nightstand.
But what did they read? And he's like, it's in your nightstand.
That's cute. I didn't hear that story.
Yeah.
All right. So on to my favorite episode.
Well, one thing that most people don't realize that was a result of Apollo 8 was the beginning of the EPA.
Yes. For those who are not aware, the EPA was a program started by Nixon.
Yep.
So I will give him credit for that, at least. So Spider's just a fun look at the engineering feat.
Oh, I know. I love that one.
Of Apollo. The title is simply called Spider. Engineers at Grumman Aviation Works with NASA and the Apollo 9 astronauts design, build, and finally test fly the world's first true spaceship, a lunar module, which will hopefully land the first humans on the moon.
Yep.
And we kind of learn how they got their call signs.
Yes.
If at this point you should know what a lunar module, or as we even heard of it in Apollo 13. Most of the astronauts still tended to call it the LEM.
Yes. I still call it.
Just about anybody who's a fan of this era of NASA still calls it the LEM.
Yeah.
Which is the Lunar Excursion Module.
Yep.
But somebody felt excursion sounded too much like they were taking a school trip, so
Yes.
they simply shortened it to the Lunar Module.
Right.
And we actually see that play out in this episode. And I just love how we start this episode off basically with the head of the engineering department and his whole department basically waiting around in his office to see if they get the contract.
See if that phone call was going to come through.
And Craven's character just does a great deadpan. Okay, I understand. Thanks. Hangs up the phone. Everybody's just looking distraught like, we didn't get it. All right, everyone, you better call your families, let them know the bad news. You're not going to see a lot of them. We got the contract.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I just loved how he did that. And I loved throughout this, it's not quite the exact song, but it sounds like the music from the Great Escape.
Yeah.
But it's just enough of a difference that they weren't infringing on the copyright on the original. So it's just a few different notes here and there, just enough to get by it. But they even reference the Great Escape because Craven's constantly playing handball off the wall, or as we would call it back in our school days, Texas wall ball.
We call it handball.
Okay. I'm sorry. Kids from Franklin called it Texas wall ball. So, anyways, you see basically it's a 7-year journey of creating this new thing.
Yeah.
And we see the little wooden model that they start with, which looks completely different.
Oh yeah, it looks nothing like what we know.
You know, if you look at 1950s comic books of spaceflight, that's what we start with, is a very round, big windows. I think it even had 3 seats in it at one point.
I don't know if it ever had 3 seats.
Okay, so it had 2 wooden chair kind of things in it at one point. And then it just slowly evolves, goes from 5 legs to 4 legs. Then they're adding runs onto one of the legs to double as a ladder. They talk about, so we need to change. We're getting rid of the big hatch, was a hatch up here.
Yeah.
And they replaced it with a docking coupler instead. Yep. Basically the same thing, but different, if you think about it. And then it was originally a round hatch, which then they had to make square because of the square backpacks.
Yep.
And at one point, the engineers are like, Tom, what if they don't need seats or sit down? You know, we could use these triangular shaped windows. And Tom goes, I don't know, guys, I just don't see it. And he leaves for the night. And at that point, the engineers find every scrap of cardboard and make a life-size mock-up of just the front plate of the LEM.
Yep.
With their triangular shaped windows. And then you see Tom walking back into this conference room. Well, I certainly can see it now.
Yeah.
And that's how they eventually moved on to no seats in the LEM.
Yep.
The small or triangular shaped windows.
Yep. I still think the thing that just slays me about the lunar module, the LEM, is that, you know, those big Mylar balloons that you get at your birthday?
Right.
It is 4 layers of that, Scotch tape, and staples that hold that sucker together.
Yep. And they even talk about that in this episode.
Yeah.
Like they were trying to come up with a way to do the heat shield without using a heat shield because it was too heavy. And they said we could use this Mylar material.
Yep, it's basically birthday balloons, tape, and staples.
So,
and even Jim McDivitt was saying in the documentary When We Left Earth that when in the training LEMs they actually had to have pads on the floor because you dropped a screwdriver, went right through it. Probably even on the real LEM too. I wouldn't be surprised if they had some sort of coating or whatever that would make it so they could drop a screwdriver and it wouldn't punch through it.
Possibly, I don't know off the top of my head. But you find out that everybody's happy about the swap between doing 9 and 8.
Yeah.
Because they really wanted to be the test pilots.
Absolutely. And that's the whole I mean, Bill Andrews really wanted, you know, he was trained for the LEM in 8. And so he was kind of bummed that knowing that, yeah, he's got all this knowledge about the LEM, but he goes and he gets to be the official photographer.
Yeah.
So. And in the crew rotation, he would have rotated in, but he would have been the command module pilot, which means he never would have gotten to fly the LEM.
That's true. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, so he knew the minute that Frank told him that they got the mission for 8 and they were going around the moon that he was never going to fly his LEM.
So we move on from, well, I like what Rusty said in this one. You know, they were talking about the gravitas of 8's mission.
Mm-hmm.
You're missing something. And Rusty says, they're basically sightseeing. We have so much to do. Our mission is fun.
Yeah.
And we almost didn't achieve one of our big safety goals in that mission because Rusty started getting sick.
Oh yeah.
Because they needed to do a spacewalk, basically.
Right.
And initially it was getting scrubbed because he was kind of getting sick, but the next day he actually looked a lot better.
Yeah.
So they were able to do everything that they set out to do.
Definitely.
So, and then,
hold on.
All right. So then we move on to episode 6, Tranquilities.
Mm-hmm.
In the glare of the public eye, conflict among the crew, disaster simulations, and a series of harrowing last-minute crises threatens the Apollo 11 astronaut success at pulling off NASA's crowning achievement, the first lunar landing.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like how this episode showed that mission. You could watch First Man and get a sense of what that mission was about. You could go back and watch the amazing documentary that just came out a couple of years ago, the Apollo 11, using the I don't want to say found footage, but it was NASA footage that was put together in a fantastic
Absolutely.
And I was able to actually watch that at a little space con thing we had in Reno, and had a couple actual mission controllers from the program there.
Oh, wow.
So I really enjoyed their perspective, but I'm not going, they weren't the big guys that we all know from mission control, so I'm not going to go.
Well, I know them, but general public might not.
Yeah. So I do like how they showed Buzz and his concern about the gravitas of that mission.
Yeah.
And do you know for a fact he took up communion on the moon?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was accurate.
Yes.
And I think we're safe to say, for the most part, we're about 90% accurate with this movie.
Oh, yeah. And the reason why is one of the main, there are two people that really helped make this as accurate as it was. One of them was Jerry Bostic, who was a flight dynamics officer in the mission control room. And the other person that was one of the advisors for the entire series was Dave Scott. You can't get much more accurate than that.
No. What I really enjoyed is the sit-down interview with Emmett Seaborn's character.
Yeah.
Again, we said 90%. This didn't exactly happen because Emmett didn't exist, but there were plenty of these type of interviews that took place before the mission. But we have Carrie Ellis's Mike Collins.
He did such a good job as Mike Collins. Oh my gosh.
You have Bryan Cranston as Buzz.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed it, but I couldn't stop thinking about the Buzz we know of today.
Yeah.
Night and day differences between the two. And then Tony again as Neil Armstrong. And, you know, Neil was all business. And honestly, I still haven't sat down to watch First Man.
Okay.
Mostly because of comments you made to me. So I can't properly give a compare and contrast between that version of Neil and this one.
Based on what I've heard from his sons, the version of Neil that you see in From the Earth to the Moon is very accurate.
Then I'm happy with that. What excuse me there. It was just interesting how close Buzz became the first man. Could have been the first man.
Yeah.
It all came down to how that hatch opened.
Yes.
You know, if it swung the other way, Armstrong's words of one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind might not have been the first words. So, all things considering, I think Neil came to the moment with the proper words.
Well, and it was, you know, he was so focused on the mission that he didn't have those words planned till probably when they actually hit the surface. And also, the fact that it took them, they almost didn't make it to the surface. Although I kind of agree with Charlie Duke. If he would have been within 100 feet, he probably would have continued the landing.
Yeah. How far did they blow their landing?
They were downrange by, I want to say, 4 miles. And it was really funny. I was actually listening to a story about Bob Carlton, who was the gentleman that was in charge of doing the fuel readouts. He had the stopwatch. Now, mind you, on that stopwatch, it had a little piece of Scotch tape at 60 seconds and another piece of Scotch tape, it would be 30 seconds. And then another piece of Scotch tape as to when it was, okay, yeah, no, you have to abort now. And so, of course, you hear in the original Air to Ground, from now the only call-outs will be fuel. That's Bob. And you listen to Bob, and he's talking about the fact that, and they landed with 17 seconds left on that stopwatch. But it was funny because, the Smithsonian approached him about donating the stopwatch. Because at that point, it never got used again. And he went to go pick it up, and it wasn't where he had left it. Well, come to find out, his granddaughter was part of a color guard and was timing herself doing things. And she used that stopwatch. So he got it back to 17 seconds and it's sitting in the Smithsonian now.
Oh, wow. That is interesting.
I thought it was just a great story.
All right. Moving on to episode 7. I think this is, like I said, my second. It's so hard to say between Spider and 7 because that's all there is such a. It is the most loose, fun episode, I think, in the whole series.
Yes.
And it's basically told from the perspective of Alan Bean.
Yes.
And as we already said, Dave Foley portrays Al Bean. A jet crash that kills one of the colleagues moves a rookie Al Bean from the Forgotten Astronaut, or Spaceland, or Tomorrowland as Pete Conrad called it, to lunar module pilot on the second moon landing. He experiences fear, amazement, disappointment, hilarity, and most of all, camaraderie aboard history's ultimate anticlimax.
Yeah.
So it's just fun to see how, he's in this empty classroom.
Oh, yeah.
Working on the space station. And all of a sudden, the door opens. It's totally backlit. Pete Conrad comes in with his aviator shades. Hey, Al, how do you like to go to the moon with me?
Yeah.
Good. We'll start training then.
Yeah.
So, what most people may not realize about the 12th mission is it got hit by not one, but 2 lightning strikes almost simultaneously.
On its own.
And you may have seen some of these out there and asked, what is this?
Yeah.
And anytime you or I see somebody with a license plate that says SCE to Ox, we know exactly what they're talking about. I've even seen people get light switches that say SCE to Ox to replace their man cave or woman cave, she shed, whatever, light switches. Yeah. So basically the transmission between the capsule and Houston was garbage. So they were just switching from main feed to secondary feed.
Right.
In a simplistic terms.
Equipment.
So.
And the cool thing, that the whole reason why it came out the way it did was because John Aaron had been in Houston during some sort of ground test from the Cape and saw what happened when the data dropped out. And it was like, he happened to notice it and was like, and he went back and researched it to find out what would fix it. And then here he is sitting there and all the data drops out and he's like, I've seen this before. So literally it was the man that just happened to remember a ground test from however many years prior.
And not only that, Pete Conrad had no idea what it was.
What the hell's that?
Command module pilot had no clue what it was.
No.
But super rookie Al Bean, I know where that is.
Yep.
So pretty cool. What the astronauts didn't know at that time is there was actual grave concern that the lightning may have took out the pyros for the parachute system.
Yep.
And it's kind of surprising at this point to know that, and they continued the mission.
Oh yeah, because at that point, I mean, whether they worked or not, they were already outside the atmosphere at that point. So
yeah, so whether they died now or 3 days from now, as they say in the episode.
Yeah, exactly.
But
it was really funny. I actually got to meet Jerry Griffin at Space Fest, and I asked him about Apollo 12. I'm like, when it came to Apollo 12, what was the one thing that went through your mind when all of that commotion was happening in the command center, in the MOCR? And he says, I'm going to be the first one that's going to have to call an abort. That was his concern at that point. And then, of course, Chris Kraft came over and said, you don't have to be under the hammer. It's your decision, but make a good one. And ultimately, he decided to continue the mission. And it was the smoothest mission they had in NASA history.
And it's the first all-Navy crew.
Yep.
And those three were literally best friends.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
We see their clones of their Corvettes.
Oh, yeah.
With their custom paint jobs.
Yep.
I say clones because I'm fairly sure if those Corvettes still exist, they're in some collector's hands.
Oh, I'm sure.
So, what I really loved was the scene where they're coming down on the LEM, on the surface, and they actually land, and there's no radio transmission for what feels like 30 seconds.
No.
And then all of a sudden, woohoo! All the excitement. Oh yeah, turn this, turn that. It's just one of the fun scenes. And then obviously we can't show this, and we won't. Because of the long list of things they had to do, the astronauts had a little checklist.
Oh yeah.
Or notebook, if you will, on their wrists, and the backup crew gave them additional reading material.
I don't know if you call it reading, though. I mean, unless you're only reading those magazines for the articles, just saying.
With that, we're moving on.
I do have to say, they did a fantastic job talking about Pete's first words.
Whoopee!
Because he was the shortest man in the astronaut corps. And so he says, whoopee! That may have been a short step for Neil, but it was a long one for me.
I just love the reaction from Emmett Seaborn.
Yeah, whoopee!
There you go. Whoopee! So, like I said, just how fun this episode was.
I like the hat with the propellers on top.
It's by far one of my two favorite episodes.
And the part of this episode, which of course probably don't want to show, where they come back to the command module and Dick Gordon's like, "You're not on my ship like that."
That's true.
I did go to Langley, which is where Yankee Clipper is now, and spoke with one of the docents. That did happen.
Yeah, Pete Conrad goes, if something should happen as we let the LEM go and that hatch blows and somebody finds us, they're going to have a lot of questions.
They couldn't get the lunar dust off of their clothes, so they decided to go in their birthday suits back into the command module.
So, yeah, it's definitely... It's so well done, and it's not it's just really well done. Let's just leave
It
it
is.
there. So moving on to episode 8, we interrupt this program. As the life-threatening consequences of Apollo 13's accident escalate in real time, so do the tensions among the NASA press corps covering it. Among them, a respected old TV journalist questioning the confrontation method of a younger, slicker colleague.
Now, I like this episode because, of course, the way they depict the explosion and all that stuff is all very well. The whole interpersonal drama between the press corps could have gone out the window as far as I'm concerned.
And they kind of addressed at the beginning in Tom's little intro.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've already seen a good representation of the events.
Right.
You know, selfless plug to Apollo 13.
Yeah, blame.
So it was just telling the story a little bit from a different perspective, which I totally respect how they did it. But like you, that whole Emmett Seaborn versus the young rookie thing, I didn't like it.
Yeah.
So, and since we've talked enough about Apollo 13 in the upcoming episode, we'll move on to one of my other favorite episodes. Well, really, I love the whole saga. So, Spider and, like I said, That's All There Is are my two favorites for two different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
One's really funny, one is kind of interesting and educational in the development. But for Miles and Miles,
that's just good.
It's great to actually see Alan Shepard's NASA career.
Oh, yeah.
You know, after he returns, then he starts suffering from his ear
Meniere's
problem.
disease. Yep.
Thank you. And we see that he was going to be the first command pilot for Gemini.
Yep.
And that got scrubbed.
Yeah.
And then he got a office position, which I loved. And this is a true story, that there was a sign outside of his office and his secretary would put a different version of his headshot in to give everybody a heads up what his mood was.
Yeah. Which version of Al Shepard you're going to get? The IC commander, or you're going to get just regular old good old Al?
There's about 5 or 6 different photos there, as I recall.
Yeah.
But just all the extra training once he got cleared medically to fly again.
Yep.
I love the little chat between him and Deke saying, "So I hear you got flight clearance back."
Hmm?
They won't let us fly together, though. I already checked. 2 half pilots don't make a whole. So, but ultimately, they depict what something in Apollo 13, the movie, kind of says, "Oh yeah, or Alan Shepard's ear infections."
Yeah.
We find out no, it was more of an internal thing. We want them to train a little more.
Right.
We don't really have faith in them.
Yeah.
So they bumped the original backup crew to prime status. And then,
which ultimately ended up going to 13's landing site.
Yeah. But I think we all agree if the events of 13 happened under Alan Shepard, he would have got the blunt of the blame, at least at the time.
Absolutely.
So, but I do love that once they finally land, we do see we couldn't see it in the footage at the time, but the recreation of the miles for miles golf shot, it was fantastic. So, hence the name for Miles and Miles.
Yep. And then they actually say that the golf ball probably only went maybe 500 yards or so. I mean, it went pretty far for a golf ball. Outside of the normal type of shot that you would get on the ground. But there's no way it went miles and miles and miles. Eventually, there's no way it could have gone into orbit because it just didn't have the escape velocity.
Right. Then we move on to episode 10. Galileo was right. Geology guru Lee Silvers helps Dave Scott and his Apollo 15 crew unravel the moon's mystery origins by teaching them to become his lunar surrogates, and thus the first fully trained field observers on another world.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, the actor who plays Lee Silvers was also in The Right Stuff.
Yep.
So you're going to go back and rewatch that.
Of course.
And this is great. And this episode is one of the episodes where we get some of the better updated CGI.
Yeah.
I loved seeing how they did the geology studying.
Mm-hmm.
That was fantastic to see them all kind of going on this geology field trip, looking for rocks, and half of them had no idea what they were doing. So if it looked shiny or something, they grab it, and it's a great education, especially if you like geology.
Oh yeah.
Watch this episode. But my favorite updated CGI is when we see Dave Scott going through the upper hatch.
Yeah.
And giving that first panoramic description.
Yes.
The updated CGI really blew that up.
Oh, that's cool.
So you really see the astronaut coming up. Before, it was more of just the actor coming up and then panning out to the virtual surface. Yep. This time, you see the actor going up and you're panning out and still watching him third person.
Okay.
So for me, it was just that's a good updated effect.
Sure.
So, and then, is there anything else about that episode you really liked?
They completely glossed over the whole reason why Al Warden and Jimmer never flew again. They got iced out of the program.
You want to share?
Yeah, so Dave Scott, and this was typically done by most of the astronauts because, of course, they couldn't get life insurance. They didn't get any sort of hazard pay. They would take up like envelopes with stamps on them and they would cancel them on the moon and sign them. And then the whole purpose was that they were going to take those envelopes back to a collector, and basically it was supposed to be put into storage. I can't remember how many years, but basically as an insurance policy for their children. End up getting out, and because Dave Scott had already flown 3 times at this point, he got his hand slapped. Al Warden got sent out to Ames, the Ames Science Center out in California, and basically put in a desk job. Jim Irwin left the program, became a pastor. But because of that choice and the fact that it came out that they were doing those cancellations of the envelopes on the moon and selling them later, unfortunately, iced those 2 out of the program. And it's interesting because if you prior to Al Warden passing away, if you go to Space Fest, you would see Dave Scott would be on one end of the area where they had all the astronauts, and Dave Scott would be, or Al Warden would be on the complete opposite end. They still didn't talk up until the day. There would never have been an Apollo 15 reunion.
Moving on to the next episode, and this is kind of a very unique episode. It's the original Wives Club, episode 11. A group of young military wives struggle with their new jobs, handling both the national spotlight and a demanding home front. Meanwhile, their astronaut husbands lose themselves to the pursuit of the national goal, alternately competing, glamorous and deadly.
Yeah.
So, I really like this, and I know I've said this before in other episodes we've recorded. ABC's miniseries, The Astronaut Wives Club.
Mm-hmm.
I highly recommend both of these.
Okay. I still haven't.
Shame on you. Anyways, I really love how we kind of open up with the new Nine's wives.
Yeah.
In this futuristic fashion show.
Yeah.
Some of the costumes are just, yeah. But you do see, and they said, I'm trying to remember exactly. I think it's Rocket Men that talked about the hierarchy of astronaut wives.
I think it was Rocketman that talks about that.
And Deke as being the head of astronaut assignments, his wife kind of was the head. I don't know what's the best way to describe it.
The leader of the group.
So we then kind of go from the big, well, they kind of use that fashion show throughout. So it's not just one scene. It's, you see it, then you see an astronaut's wife come out, and then you see some backstory about each wife. And I do want to shout out that we have the mom from the 70s show as one of the astronauts' wives. And we see Sally Fields, which she plays Trudy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she does a great job, but we have three, well, technically now we have four, or five, if you think about it, different portrayals of Trudy Cooper.
Yeah.
You know, we have the one from The Right Stuff. We have the one from Disney Plus's The Right Stuff. We have the one from ABC's Astronaut Wives. And now we have this one. And all four of them are slightly different. I would say the Disney Plus version and the Astronaut Wives version, at least in those two versions, we find out she's a female pilot.
Yeah.
You look at Sally Fields' version, I can't picture her as a astronaut wannabe.
Right.
Which we find out in the Disney Plus version, she was trying to be one of those first female astronaut corps.
Yeah.
So.
But Gordo opened his mouth and yeah.
So we do see some great storylines. Like we do see Susan Borman's addiction problem.
Yeah.
And I'll just kind of leave it simply as that.
Yeah. Actually, it wasn't addiction, it was alcohol.
Alcohol addiction.
Well, yeah.
I didn't want to say which one. Jeez. I was trying to be respectful. I thought that was great the way they played it out.
Well, the part I loved about it is the fact that they show Frank as being so incredibly devoted to her.
Yes.
And the fact that continues to this day is beautiful.
It is. And, you know, for us, it's even more special knowing that they retired to a ranch outside of Billings, Montana.
Yep.
And since we're both from Montana, I wish I could have met him.
Oh yeah. And there's times I go to Billings and it's like, you know, because I know that he tends to, you know, go meet with his friends at coffee shops and stuff around Billings. And it's like, okay, can this just be the one time that I walk into a place in Billings where he's sitting there?
It's the only good thing about Billings. So, what else on that episode? We have the Astronaut Wives on that Gemini mission for the first spacewalk.
Yep.
And I think my favorite other kind of scene in when the Lovels are moving out of their Houston house.
Oh, yeah.
And Jim Lovell finds hospital bracelets.
Mm-hmm.
And finds out his oldest daughter, Susan, had her tonsils out.
Yeah.
And he goes, when did this happen? I think that was when you were training for 8.
Yeah.
Why didn't I know about this? You know, the astronaut wives were supposed to take care of everything at home.
Yep.
So the astronauts could just focus on their duties.
Yes.
And as we pointed out, I believe on the last episode during The Right Stuff, Jim Lovell and Frank Borman are 2 of the only astronauts still married to the same wife.
Yeah.
Almost every other astronaut got divorced at one point or the other.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's 1 or 2 others that are on that list. But
yeah, I remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, doesn't matter. So moving on to the final episode of From the Earth to the Moon, which is kind of the most artistic version of episode.
Yeah, I would agree.
And that is Le Voyage de la Lune.
Yeah.
What's just fun is they're recreating in some of it the 1902 French silent classic Voyage to the Moon. Tom Hanks portrays the
director.
Not the director himself, the second director.
Yeah, the
AD.
cat herder.
So it's just kind of fun how they take the original film. You see the colorized version where they're actually making it, and then you also get the final moon mission mixed into that.
Mm-hmm.
And this one is done in both a post-interview years later kind of interview, retrospective, if you will, and footage of during the mission.
Yeah.
And I love how David Hugh Kelly plays Gene Crennan. And even Jack Smith's actor did a great job.
You mean Gene Cernan, right?
Yeah, sorry, Gene Cernan.
Too many Genos.
Too many genes. So, and I don't know, was that actually the original archive footage of Gene's daughter doing an interview?
Yep, that was his daughter.
So that was cool. I don't know if that was actually his daughter doing the retrospective interview off.
Look, but if
I'd have to go back, but
yeah, and they actually did a really good documentary called Last Man on the Moon, and it is literally an hour and a half of nothing but Gene Cernan, and his daughter is actually in the documentary with him.
So if you have the chance, even if you don't want to spend any money, get that free HBO Max trial. It is available on the HBO Max app.
Yep, it is.
You can also pick it up on just about any digital platform, Vudu, Prime Video. Like we said, it's 12 episodes. If you have the box set like I once had, I've been going through the pains of replacing my DVDs and Blu-rays with digital copies
Yeah.
to take up less room. I did keep my 5th and final disc out of the Tom Hanks Signature Edition.
Yeah.
Which had a lot more behind the scenes and
nice
documentary kind of stuff. So I kept that, but for those interested, the Alpine County Library in Markleeville, California currently has my original DVDs since I now have the digital copies. So overall, like I said, 90% accurate. Anytime they were questioning something, 2 people come to mind. They always went to Dave Scott, and if Dave wasn't immediately available to answer their question, they would immediately go for Andrew, the author.
Yeah. And if it had to do with anything having to do with mission control, they went to
So as we're wrapping this up, is there anything about the series that you wish they would have done different or done more?
Would have covered 10 and 16 a little bit, because like nobody gets to get introduced to John Young.
That's true.
And they're driving, and they're literally spinning Brodies on the moon in the rover. You don't get to hear about Gene Cernan getting to within the whole reason why they didn't give 10 enough fuel in the LEM to land is because they just might. There's some that story that could have been told that they chose not to.
Yeah, they just kind of do a flyby show of Gene saying, "We're down among them, Charlie."
Yeah.
But yeah, would have been a whole lot different if they would have landed.
Yeah. Yeah, they could have landed, but they never would have gotten off.
Yeah.
The ascent engine was underfueled.
Good thing they obeyed orders.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't. There's only 2 episodes that even show the rover in it.
Yeah.
And really, we don't get any of the actual bigger imagery of the updated LEM that included the rover.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like, it's just, surprise, here's a rover, without even talking about how it got up there. The fact they basically attached it to the ascent engine, and like on 14, they actually had to lift it up. Or was it 15?
15 was the first one.
Yeah, 15, they actually had to basically lift it up and pull it off of the LEM because it didn't come off the way it was supposed to. And of course, Gene, driving it like a maniac, ended up ripping off the fender and had to build a new fender out of an old map and duct tape.
Well, they did talk about that in the final episode.
Yeah, but it's like, there's different things about that story of the rover that didn't get told that really could have been.
And I don't know if you could see that in the show, but they are Goodyear wheels on there.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, once again, Shelby, thank you for joining me on this, and I hope everybody enjoys our final episode, Apollo 13, on April 13th.